You're watching UATV News. My name is Ina Kosinska. Good evening. 3,206 new cases of COVID-19 registered in Ukraine over the past day. Almost 1,500 patients were hospitalized and 1,353 recovered. Among the leaders in morbidity are Ivano-Frankivsk, Vinnytsia and Zhytomyr regions. In total, during the pandemic in Ukraine, more than 1,300,000 people contracted coronavirus. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health is moving on to the next stage of the reform of the provision of early hospital emergency medical care. A part of the project concerns training according to international standards of doctors and medical staff with new rules and approaches to resuscitation actions for patients who come to the emergency departments. Ukraine in this project will employ the experience of countries that have already implemented this system: Australia, Ireland and Poland. That will make it possible to create a system of emergency medical care at the hospital stage according to the best international practices. Ukraine will receive another 5 million doses of coronavirus vaccine from the American company Novavax, Health Minister Maxim Stepanov informed on his Facebook. Now the Ministry of Health expects to receive 15 million doses of this vaccine. The first deliveries of this drug are expected this year in July. Ukraine is going to develop the state-private partnership to finance the new project's renovations and development. Besides, the country also expects to receive the next tranche of the IMF. According to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, they expect two more $700 million tranches. The head of state noted that Ukraine should still fulfill a couple agreements with the bills on the High Council of Justice and National Anti-Corruption Bureau as well.
We have registered the draft law on the High Council of Justice. We have registered the draft law on the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. There are several other economic laws that we must approve. That's the agreement. The International Monetary Fund says we lack some 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 things. We have to do them. We agree or disagree. I believe that we have normal relations with the International Monetary Fund.
A new airport in Donbas. The project development of the air gates for civil aircraft is planned to begin this year. This was announced by the President of Ukraine in an interview to Ukrainian TV channels in the frameworks of the Ukraine 30 Infrastructure Forum. At the same time, he noted that it is unsafe to reopen the airport in Mariupol.
We will find a location between the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and this year we will begin designing a new airport for these two regions anyway. It will be a new serious airport for these two areas.
President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy put into force the decision of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on sanctions against 19 legal entities and 8 individuals. Among them is Viktor Medvedchuk, MP of Ukraine, also known as pro-Russian politician and President Putin's friend, and Viktor Medvedchuk's wife, Ukrainian TV host Oksana Marchenko. More details in the following report.
The decision of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine to return the oil pipeline to the state ownership will increase the level of energy security of Ukraine. Experts are confident in that. There is a certain boundary share of imports of any energy carrier. This is 30% from one source along one route. And any dependence on any state exceeding 30% for any oil product is a threat to the energy security of any country. To remind, 19 companies and 8 individuals, including Viktor Medvedchuk, MP from one of the alleged pro-Russian parliamentary parties, and his wife Oksana Marchenko, became objects of personal sanctions by the Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. The security service in turn accuses them of financing terrorism. Sanctions are being imposed. All property owned by Mr. Medvedchuk shall be arrested. They have no right to sell it, they have no right to use it, they have no right to mortgage it. The sanctions have already been imposed by the decision of the National Security and Defense Council. The introduction of sanctions means simply freezing the assets so that further investigation can carry out all investigative actions according to the procedure and identify a causal relationship. And if there are any violations of legislation or indeed the crime that was mentioned, then the perpetrators must be punished. The Security and Defense Council also made a secret decision to revise the scenarios regarding actions in the Donbas due to the aggravation of the situation in the Joint Forces Operation Zone. Experts are confident there will be new agreements. If the Minsk agreements do not work out, then we will act according to Plan B or C. I would say that at the moment these agreements have exhausted themselves. We must nevertheless use the opportunities to attract the Americans to them as close as possible. The sanctions have also been imposed on companies that own 5 planes carrying out illegal direct flights from Kyiv to Moscow. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Vlada Tsurkan, UATV News.
Ukraine and Poland asked the US to stop the construction of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. The foreign ministers of the two countries, Dmytro Kuleba and Zbigniew Rau, called on US President Joe Biden to use every means available to him for this.
If the project is successful, Russia could try to convince the Ukrainian public that the West doesn't care about its own principles and ultimately about the security and prosperity of Ukraine. This project is not about the energy security of Germany, our close ally and partner. Ukraine deeply appreciates Germany's efforts to bring peace to the war-torn Donbas region and its vital support to Ukraine's reforms.
EU foreign ministers agreed to prepare sanctions on Russia, Reuters agency reports. This is response to the jailing of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. According to diplomatic sources, the people on the list will be targeted with asset freezes and entry bans to the bloc.
For us, it's, the first time personal sanctions are applied with regard to human rights violations. It opens a way for further negotiation on this with Europe. It sends a very clear message to people who are part of this regime, and maybe this will contribute at least to a small crack, to a small split within the regime, when people start to feel that being close to Putin is not as safe and pretty anymore as it used to be.
One of the largest environmental disasters in decades, all Mediterranean beaches were closed in Israel because of the oil spill. They turned black after a violent storm on February 17th. The authorities are trying to find the ship responsible for the disaster. Thousands of residents, as well as the military, volunteered to clean the beaches from pollution. Several people were hospitalized on Saturday after inhaling toxic fumes. The Prime Minister of Israel visited the affected area.
I just spoke to the Egyptian energy minister, who turned to us, and we proposed that all the ships that you see there will be operated on natural gas instead of fuel, which is polluting as we see here. I think that if there is a union of several countries, we can create it within several years. It's a huge challenge.
Diplomats and ambassadors are skiing. The snowy winter made it possible to hold a traditional ski tournament for representatives of diplomatic missions and embassies in Kyiv. Our correspondent knows more about the race.
3, 2, 1, start! Побігли перші учасники!
Throughout its history, the Diplomatic Cup has been cancelled twice, in 2014 due to the Maidan protests and in 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Фініш, естафету передано! Останнє коло для команди Швеції!
The ski races in 2012 were initiated by the ambassadors of Austria, Norway and Switzerland, but this year none of them came to the competition, citing quarantine restrictions. There are quite serious restrictions in their countries. There is quarantine in Ukraine as well. They abstained diplomatically this year, and the embassy of Sweden, like the real Vikings, said they will take part, without any hesitation. The quartet of Scandinavian diplomats was led by the Swedish ambassador to Ukraine, Tobias Tiberg. He has done his best at a distance.
Right now that my lungs are hurting. That's my emotion. In Ukraine, this is my third time. Otherwise, whenever there's snow.
For all participants, the result on the track is secondary. Applications are submitted for the race primarily for the sake of pleasure. Colleagues are friends and friends are colleagues, and we have been doing it for many years, both at work and outside of work. So thank you all.
The winter in Kyiv was wonderful. It was impossible not to take part in this competition.
It seems to me that it was a little unusual now, because the last time I skied a little long ago, but that is so cool. All willing went to the ski track together with the diplomats and ambassadors. The age of participants is from 4 to 85, and the organizers are confident that the number of people wishing to ski will only increase. The main thing is that winters in Ukraine are snowy. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Alexei Navalny, UATV News.
Several weeks of freezing weather have partially frozen over the famous Niagara Falls on the border between Canada and the United States. The sound of roaring water went silent, which is usually carried for kilometers around. Numerous people who wanted to take a selfie against the backdrop of this miracle of nature received a bonus. A rainbow appeared overhead. That's all for this hour. More updates on our official website, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook pages. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.